So far, we have discussed about force and the effects of force. Now, there are five common types of forces which we notice in our everyday life. These are muscular force, frictional force, magnetic force, electrostatic force, and gravitational forces. And all the types of forces can be divided into two main groups: contact forces and non contact forces. Now, what do we mean by contact forces? So, students, a force which can be exerted by an object on another object only through physical touching. It's called a contact force. So, when two interacting bodies, two interacting objects are perceived to be physically contacting each other, then the type of force which results there is the contact force. So, there are two main examples of contact forces: muscular force and frictional force. So, we'll discuss muscular force and frictional force in detail one by one. So, first of all, what is muscular force? Suppose, students, there's a book which is lying on a table. Now, we want to lift this book from the table. What we need to do? We require some force, right? So we will lift this book from the table by hand. So we are applying the force. The force is getting exerted by the muscles of our arm, right? Similarly, suppose when we kick a football, the force is exerted by the muscles of our leg, right? So the force exerted by the muscles of the body is called muscular force. And both human beings and animals, they exert muscular force to do work. Human beings exert muscular force for performing various day-to-day activities like walking, running, jumping, climbing, pushing, kicking, twisting. For instance, a boy that's pushing a cart on a road, he's using a muscular force. Suppose a child is riding a bicycle, person is carrying a load on a wheelbarrow. Person is drawing water from a well. These are all examples of a muscular force, and it is the muscular force which enables us to perform all the activities involving the movement or bending of body parts. And yeah, students, let me tell you that muscular force acts inside our body also to perform various functions required for our survival. You know that in the process of digestion, it's actually the muscular force which pushes the food through the alimentary canal. In fact, in during breathing, expansion and contraction of lungs when we inhale and exhale air, that also involves muscular force. Beating of the heart, that also takes place because of the muscular force that is produced by the cardiac muscles. And you know about animals like ox, camel, horse. They provide the force of their muscles and help the man in doing various harder jobs. Like ox is pulling the plow by using its muscular force. Horse and camel, they exert their muscular force in pulling the carts, right? So this since this muscular force, it can be applied to an object only when our body is in contact with the object, right? When the body of an animal, when our body is in contact with the other object, only then you can apply a muscular force. So therefore, muscular force is a contact force. As I told you that when we lift a book from the table, we're applying our muscular force. So for applying our muscular force, we need to bring our hand in contact with the book, right? We cannot lift the book from table without touching it. So our contact with an object for applying muscular force can also be through stick. It can be through a piece of rope, but a contact should be there. Physical touching should be there. So for example, when we hit a hockey ball, we apply muscular force to ball, but through what? Through the hockey stick. So here we are again in contact. When we draw a bucket of water from well, we are applying muscular force through what? Through the rope which is tied to the bucket. So we can apply muscular force through stick, through piece of rope, but we need to apply muscular force when we, and it can be applied only when we are in contact with the object. So this is all about muscular force. Now let's talk about frictional force, or you can simply say friction. Say for instance, a ball is moving on the ground. You know, students, that when a ball is moving on the ground, it slows down gradually and stops after covering some distance, right? Now we know that a force is required to stop a moving body. Then this means now that a force is exerted by the ground on the moving ball, which opposes its motion and brings that ball to stop. So the force is there, and that force is exerted by the ground on that moving ball. And this force, which opposes the motion of the ball on the ground, it's known as frictional force. So friction force which always opposes the motion of one body over another body, it's called frictional force or friction. And see students, frictional force acts between two surfaces which are in contact with each other. So if a ball is moving on the ground, it slows down and then stops. Why? Because of the frictional force between the ball and the ground. So in this case, two surfaces in contact are the surface of the ground and the surface of the ball. And we are having a lot of examples from our everyday life where frictional force is involved. Suppose if we are running a bicycle, and say if we stop pedaling a bicycle, what will happen? It slows down gradually and stops after covering some distance. Now tell me students, why the bicycle slows down and then finally comes to stop? Due to the frictional force, right? Frictional force between the tires of bicycle and the road, right? So this frictional force opposes the motion of bicycle and brings it to a stop. So again, two surfaces are in contact. Which one? Surface of road and the surface of tires of bicycle, right? Similarly, suppose we are rowing a boat which is moving in water. Suppose we stop rowing a boat, what will happen? It slows down and then stops. The boat which is moving in water, why it slows down, why it stops? Again, because of the frictional force between the boat and the water. That force exerted by water opposes the motion of boat and it makes it stop. So again, two surfaces are in contact. One is surface of boat and the other is surface of water. So frictional force always acts on all the moving objects. And remember one thing, its direction is always opposite to the direction of motion. Okay, that is why it opposes the motion, because this force always comes in the opposite direction of motion. And see, frictional force arises only when two surfaces are in touch with each other, are in contact with each other. Therefore frictional force is an example of a contact force. And remember one more thing here, that it's not necessary that the agent applying a force on an object should always be in contact with it. There are some forces which act on an object even from a distance, but those are not contact forces. Okay, so this was all about contact forces and the two examples of contact force, muscular force and frictional force.